Hi everyone, today we're going to do part 2 of the electrical system on our leopard catamaran 44.
And part 2 is about the inverter. So converting all that 12 volt electricity you get from the solar system to 240 volts so you can actually run appliances. And a really important component for us is the inverter. This is a 3 kVA inverter, which is about 2,500, 2,600 watts. And what this does is it's got the negative cables coming in from the battery, very, very thick ones, because they carry a lot of amperage. And those actually go through a circuit breaker down here. Very important, so you can turn this off at the high amperage side. And this inverter takes the 12 volt feed and turns that into 240 volts. And that allows us to run all of the essential appliances that we need when we're out on anchor. So we can run our washing machine, we can run microwave, we can run induction hot plates, and really any other 240 volt systems, chargers, everything. So there's 2 cables that come out of this, 240 volt cables. One of them goes straight up from here to a power point, and the other one goes through that same ducting over to the other side of the boat to another power point. And we've actually kept the power points for the inverters separate from the shore power on this boat, because the shore power system also incorporates the generator. So including the inverter, the generator, and the shore power into one single system ends up in being a very complex system, and we've tried to avoid that. Just looking down in the port hull, and all of the bus bars and the electricals are located down here. Before I put the inverter in, I had to make up a wooden bracket that hangs off the bottom there and also bolts to the wall. The inverter actually weighs quite a lot, so it's pretty important for it to be well supported. So this is the inverter open. It's a 3000 watt inverter. And you can see the AC cables coming out, and I still need to connect up the DC cables so that we've got power going into the inverter. So the negative cable here will come off the negative bus bar and come to the inverter here, and then I've got a positive cable here that will come from the positive bus bar to here. These are the power points up in the galley, and this one here is a shore power point, and that one there is connected to the inverter. So we've kept the shore power, which also includes the generator, separate from the inverter power, and that way we don't have any complications. And we have another power point over the other side, so we're only going to connect 2 power points to the inverter. And that should be enough, because we don't need to run that much when we're out on the water, just a few appliances. So I've now cabled both the negative and positive DC terminals from the bus bars to the inverter. You can see them both connected there. And the positive actually comes through this circuit breaker that I've installed there. Now I've got that turned off at the moment, so I'll now test it by turning that circuit breaker on. So that circuit breaker is now on, and I'll turn on the inverter. We've got a green light there, so we'll just go up and test to see if it's working. So I'll turn this on at the power point. And yes, we've got light. So the inverter is now working, which is great. And here it is with the cover put back on the inverter. Just a couple of things to notice is that I have the inverter grounded to the negative side of the boat, which is what's recommended. And that's the ground over there, and that goes up to the negative bus bar. And right here I have a network cable, and you can see the end. It's a standard network cable. And that comes out of the network port on the inverter, and I can use that to plug into a special converter to plug into my PC, and it will give me information about the inverter. Unfortunately, this series of inverters from Victron don't have a Bluetooth interface, which is a bit odd. They use a completely different interface called VE bus. Yeah, so that's kind of a little bit inconvenient, because everything else in the Victron range, like the controller up here and the shunt that goes to the battery monitor, all of that connects via the Bluetooth app on my phone, but not this one. This one has to go straight to a PC. No one really knows why. We've been finding that when we use the inverter that we're getting an unacceptable voltage drop, and it's causing the inverter to reset at very high amperages. So it's when we're using big appliances like the espresso machine, or sometimes the microwave at high power. So these cables, the red and the black, the negative and positive going in, they were supposed to be the right size cable, but I've bought some thicker cables that are a higher gauge that look like this to go into the inverter. So I'm just going to change those, and that should hopefully stop the problem. So I need to take the back off the inverter, undo the cables in there. I've got to take them off the bars there, and I've also got to cut the positive cable and put it into the circuit breaker here, and I might actually flip the circuit breaker around so it's easier to get the cable in. So I've disconnected all of the leads off the inverter here, and also off of the circuit breaker here, and I'm pulling the leads through the blocks up here. You can see the negative going through. These are really tight. It's a real wrestle, and very, very limited space as well, but we can get them through. PowerPoints from the European PowerPoints to Australian PowerPoints, and it's kind of a tricky job because the holes that they've made for the European PowerPoints are quite big. So I have to backfill these holes with some blocks of wood so I can screw into them. Also, there's some pretty interesting configurations with cables going into one PowerPoint, jumpering over to the other, and then going out to another cable. So, but it's pretty straightforward, but a bit unusual.
Do you need to cut them all?
Yep. Got to cut all of them. I just got to strip these wires so that I can get into the terminals on the new PowerPoints. So it's a very cramped space here, but I've got to put some glue on these blocks of wood, and this glue is very messy. Then I've got to place a bit of glue on the inside here, and then hopefully not drop it, and then do one on the top as well. There we go. Then I have to secure each of these blocks of wood in place with a screw until I actually get the PowerPoint in place, because the PowerPoint will actually, and the glue will hold these in place. But meanwhile, they need to be screwed in to hold them. And the bottom one. A little elf to go inside there. So now I'm just connecting the power point up. So every power point has an active, a neutral, and an earth. The active is the one that carries the power. It goes back through the neutral, and the earth is just a safety measure. If something contacts, then the earth will take the power away. So now all the cables are connected, and I'm just going to screw this into the wall. And here it is finished. All I need to do now is putty up these extra holes. So you can see here there's two power points, and on this side we've got one here that's shore power and generator, and this one here is only the inverter. So if we want to run any of our systems when we're out at sea or on an anchor, we can simply plug them into this system, and it completely isolates them from the other AC systems. And then we've got another power point on this side of the boat, and we've chosen to only have two inverter power points because realistically that's enough. We're not going to be running that many things off the inverter when we're either on the anchor or out at sea. I've just put this remote switch in for the inverter. So I had to run the cable in behind this wall here through a really narrow space and down through this ceiling panel. It's designed to come down, but it actually doesn't fit down easily. I had to bring it round through here, drill a hole in the wall above the panel, bring it down here. This is the cable here. Comes down through there and then plugs into inverter here. It's basically a network cable. It's used for the on-off switch and also the lights to show you if there's any faults. It was an interesting job, but it works. The battery monitor is located in the port hull in the aft cabin with all of the other equipment, including the solar controller. The battery monitor is quite important because it allows you to get access to all of the information about the batteries and also do some checking and controlling of the batteries. The first component of the battery monitor is the shunt. The shunt takes the input from the negative side of the battery into this bar, and then that leads off here to the main negative bus bar. Down the bottom of the shunt there's this, you can see a small red cable. That's a small positive feed that comes into a circuit to provide a complete circuit so it can provide the information for the battery. And that grey cable that comes down is basically a telephone cable, an RJ cable. That cable leads to the gauge on the panel that gives you the information about the battery. And to get there, it needs to go through a duct that goes from this side of the catamaran to the other side of the catamaran. Up on the main panel on the other side, on the starboard side, is the display for the battery monitor. And as well as giving a display, it also has built-in Bluetooth. Unlike the solar controller, which has a dongle, this is built-in Bluetooth. So we can, on this gauge, we can cycle through and get some information. It's telling us that the battery's at 14.25 volts. It's 100% charged. It doesn't give any amp hour information because it's fully charged and there's lots of power coming in. And right at the moment there's 150 something watts coming in, and that's just on float because the battery's fully charged. Normally it would be a lot higher than that. And that's the number of amps. And if we had a second battery connected to this, or a second battery bank connected to this, this would give information about that battery bank, which we don't have at the moment. So one of the great things about these Victron systems is that you can connect to them by Bluetooth and get a whole lot of really important information from them. And you can do this on your tablet or your phone. I'm just looking at my tablet right now. So what you can see here are the icons for the solar controller and the battery monitor. And if we go into the solar controller, it tells us there's 228 watts coming in. Now there's probably actually a lot more than that, but because it's gone to absorption, the solar controller would have scaled that down. If you look at this panel along the bottom here, it'll give us the history of the amount of power that we've been getting each day. And it'll give us both the total amount of power that came in plus the peak power. And if you look over on this side, it tells us the current voltage, the current that's coming in at that panel voltage, which is 34.5 volts. And down below it shows us how the solar controllers converted that to 14.32 volts at a higher current. So the current here is 6.4 amps, the current down here is 15.6 amps. And it's telling us that it's on absorption at the moment, and pretty soon that will go to float, which means it's basically a very small amount of power coming in to keep it topped up. If you look at the battery monitor, it's just connecting to it. So it's telling us that the battery's 100% charged. It's telling us that we've got 14.27 volts and there's 9.7 amps of current coming in at the moment. And that current is the current that's coming in via the solar panels minus what's being used for fridges, etc. at the moment. And then it gives us that in wattage. Down below that it tells us how much we've consumed in terms of amp hours, which is 0 because right now we've got more coming in than we're consuming, so it won't tell us what we're consuming until we've actually come down below 100%. And once it does, it'll tell us what we've consumed at any time and how much we've got remaining, which is a really valuable feature, because when you're sitting out here on anchor and you are relying on power to run systems in the boat, you want to know how many hours you've got left. And typically with the battery bank that we've got, we'll have days left, not hours left. So we might have 2 or 3 days of power left, even if we had nothing coming in. So some of those important essential appliances that you need to run when you're out at sea are, first of all, the espresso machine. You've got to have good coffee. Microwave. Everyone needs a microwave. You've got induction hot plates. We've got 2 of those. Great for cooking. They heat things up quickly, they're really efficient, and they cut down on the heat inside the cabin. One of the problems with using the gas in the cabin when it's hot is it turns the whole of the cabin into a hot box. And of course a toaster, because you want some toast with your coffee. The other 2 useful appliances when you're out at sea are a rice maker. It's just really convenient to put rice in here and let it cook, and quite efficient. And this griddle. So the griddle allows you to press things or open it all the way up and cook things on 2 different hot plates. And it's not perfect, but it provides a really good alternative to frying things in a frying pan. Or really, it's kind of like a barbecue. And this is really important. A lot of people on boats don't have a washing machine. We sort of considered that having a washing machine was essential to being out at sea, because if you can't wash your clothes, you end up having to go to laundromats or just basically wear dirty clothes every day. And for us that wasn't acceptable, so washing machine with a decent water maker and a good power supply is essential. And this is a very efficient washing machine. It's made for an RV, and the brand is Kamek. And this machine has been fantastic.
Thanks for watching part 2, guys. I hope you enjoyed how the inverter works.
Because you got to get that power to the appliances. Very important.
Thanks
Bye.
for watching.